Hey,
You
everybody.
were you were saying this young girl and her parents promised her what? Laying a Bible in her lap, and what was her problem?
Yes, so I was describing a young lady with a, a genetic defect that led her to not be able to see, and her foster parents were theists and insisted every morning gave her a Bible and insisted that she tried to read it, and told her that if she only believed a little bit more strongly, that she would have the ability to read that Bible, and she not only felt as a result of that as a big failure, but also as somebody that, that God didn't love, that God didn't want to get better. And so what I think her foster parents were trying to teach her something very positive. It came off as completely detrimental and toxic to her. And I remember that that's really stuck with me as a very problematic uh, approach to spirituality and to the 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 idea of the way that God interacts with us. So
So how was she specially horrible toward God,
right,
to cause her blindness? What did
right,
she do? You think?
yeah. I wonder what they would say about that. I wonder if they would say it was some kind of sins of the parents or um, being visited on their children, or I'm not sure. I'm not sure what they would say. I never had the opportunity to sit down with them and talk to them about that.
That's sad.
But
It's very, very
yeah,
sad.
I think about that all the time, and I wonder how many other young people or otherwise are in the position where they think they are inadequate, and it's their inadequacy that leads them to their suffering. Of course, sometimes that is true. I mean, sometimes we really do screw up and have to suffer the consequences of that. I mean, that is, but I don't think that that's true in a spiritual way. I mean, if God fits the qualities that we normally ascribe to God, then that's not a God that's like hanging a disability over our heads as some kind of like blackmail for behaving exactly correctly. Or Richard and I were just talking about how silly it is to imagine believing harder. Like, just believe harder. What does that even mean? It's not. Belief isn't like that. Belief is a zero or one kind of a thing. It's a binary thing. You either believe it or you don't believe it. It's not like, oh, I really believe. I'm gonna sit down and believe that even more now. I'm gonna I'm gonna really push. I don't. That's so silly, but that's part of the language of
It
at
is.
least American Christianity. Is if only you
Sure.
had more faith or believed more, whatever that means. I don't know what that means.
Maybe
I,
that means never have doubting thoughts or
Mm,
feelings. Don't even admit it to your rational dialogue going on. Just
sure.
never think about God not doing it and not doubt it. And of course, then there's the power of the tongue.
yeah.
That you speak things that, according to one's tongue, has great power, gracious power, allegedly. But anyway, uh, carry on. Yes.
I love how you deliver things, Tommy. That's awesome. I love the caveat. Or so I'm told.
Or
It's
so I'm
awesome.
told.
Yeah.
Tommy, maybe you would share with us something else that you were possibly told. Maybe it hasn't come up in conversation. Um, why do you think that God would not heal some blind child? Why do you think that would be?
Hmm.
Well, there was a certain tower somewhere in the book of John, in one of my holy Bibles, that this tower fell on these rascals. And they came to Jesus and said, "Well, what's the deal? Did they sin, or their parents sin, or what's up with that?" And I think the response went from Christ Jesus himself, if my memory serves.
Mhm.
Christ himself said that it wasn't their fault nor their parents' sins, but it
Hmm.
was to the glory of God. Whatever
Wow.
happened, it was to the glory of God. I think that's how one story went. But I don't know if that addresses your inquiry, Richard. Could you repeat that question?
No, it's good enough. I mean, it's certainly a story that reviews pain and suffering and justification.
Mm-hmm.
Well, there are many wars and battles of life. And I don't know about your personal battlefield, but mine's been pretty freaky. You know what I'm saying? I mean, I've seen some minor first world suffering that I hope you can't imagine. You know, a little bit.
Yeah.
And it's so I can empathize with your average rascal sometimes. It's just plain shell shocked. You know, it's like, oh my God, who knows what's going to happen next? And I don't know if there's any point to that. Back to you, Richard.
I'm gonna have to leave it to you, fine people. I got to get back
Thanks
to
for
my
dropping
duties
in.
here. Yeah, hopefully I'll see you guys later. If you're still at it, I will definitely make a point to jump back in. So y'all have a good time. Tommy, always a pleasure. Back at you.
Thank you, my lord. Thank you.
Yeah, brothers, thanks so much. Bye.
Tell me, Tommy, what you think of this.
He's a very polite man.
Oh yeah, very nice.
I like that virtue in him. You know.
Sure. I don't only like it in him; I like it in anyone who displays it.
Well,
That was a joke. That was a joke, bro.
You obviously value kindness. You do. Not too kind, no. And
what do you think about this observation, Tommy?
That's 99% flattery free, bro. I meant that. But go ahead.
No, I know. Okay. God the Father could conduct end times anytime that he likes. In fact, it's apparently when he likes. So we could be elevated to a better situation. I'll just put it that way. Anytime he so chooses.
Any one of us?
All of us. The whole
How
world.
about any one of us?
Sure, any one of us.
Oh,
that works as well.
Good. Thank you.
So doesn't that explicitly mean that he's choosing to let us suffer?
Yeah, I'd have to say it's looking that way.
All right. Okay, so if the Father is choosing for us to suffer and not fixing that, at least for now, why would he correct suffering, defeating himself?
Well, let's say that makes a good case for God being omnipotent and yet having a plan, and suffering's a part of it. You know, what is suffering but a compilation of different phenomena? And you know, there's different types of suffering, and some of them are can be overesteemed as worse than it truly is. It's like, oh hell, I got to eat, you know, strawberries this morning instead of oatmeal. You know. Anyway, first world sufferings and third world sufferings type sufferings and wartime type sufferings and tragedy of life type, you know, oh God, they're heavy. Suffering's still a mind blower. The different for me personally.
Why?
Because it's if I over focus on it, it can create more suffering. And me personally, I have a more miserable day.
Right.
And sometimes it's hard to understand why things happen. You know, yeah. And the overall of it, suffering, just the overall suffering of life. Life, I guess, is consistent suffering.
I have a theory on this. Tell me what you think of this idea. When I suffer, as long as I'm not too hurt from it, I gain empathy for other people who've had the same suffering.
Oh, that's biblical.
Suffering of people does things like builds children's hospitals. right? Cancer centers, general hospitals, not to mention, not trying to quote the name of an old soap opera, and everything that we do that has to do with empathy is because of suffering. After all, in the face of no suffering, no empathy.
Okay.
So what if God is building our brotherhood? What do you think of that, Tommy? What if God is building our brotherhood? What if this is the basic training that's supposed to make us an elite fighting force together?
Oh God, are we talking spiritual warfare here? Oh, I hate spiritual warfare. It's such a heavy topic.
No, I'm not talking. I wasn't going to get into.
I leave that to the young and the other part of the body of Christ to deal with the spiritual warfare.
I wasn't really going to get into that. It just made for an easy comparison that it's basic training for soldiers that causes them to become a group. It's the suffering that causes them to become a group.
Okay, so my suffering helps me experience love for another human being. That's good. That's just plain good,
That is good.
Yeah, that's a good result, or I guess part of the big plan for each of us individually is that suffering help us love one another. Sounds good. We all love that. Yeah.
I think this is the same pedestal that women stand on when they say men have no right to talk about pregnancy. It's because they have that shared suffering experience. They are entitled to speak about it, have opinions about it, everything else. That's totally justified.
To who? You?
To themselves.
How often? To themselves, yes.
Right.
I mean, I neither condemn nor endorse any type of self-pity. Yes.
Would you be for the end of women's suffrage?
Human suffrage, yes.
So people shouldn't be allowed to vote.
Yes, women are humans. So hell yes, the end of women's suffrage. How about you? Are you pro women's suffrage or?
Oh, I'm definitely pro women's suffrage.
Beg your pardon?
I am pro women's suffrage. I just wish our media covered the actual politics instead of just a bunch of hype and crap.
Can all women vote in North Korea?
I have no idea. If I had to throw a guess out there, I'd say definitely, no freaking way, no. I mean, in North Korea, they have traffic police,
right?
And in major cities where filming is allowed to take place along certain routes that you're allowed to, as a tourist, you're allowed to film, take pictures. All of the traffic police are women between the ages of 17 and 30, and the most beautiful women they can get. And that's all the traffic police. Beautiful women. Beautiful young women.
That sounds strategically productive.
You think?
Yeah. I think it's an art. The art of law enforcement and public safety.
Well, there's no actual traffic. It's only tourism traffic.
Oh. And where is that? In France?
You were talking about, and I was replying about North Korea.
Ah, yes. How's the woman's suffrage in France? Is that at an acceptable level?
I don't know enough about it, but I would think that they're relatively progressive.
Do you endorse women's suffrage in France.
24 hours a day.
I hear you, during sleeping moments and everything.
Yes.
Do you hold belief in Jesus when you're asleep
Yes, of course.
at all moments,
Yeah, absolutely.
even when
Now
you get
doesn't mean
mad? Uh-huh.
that doesn't necessarily mean I'm thinking about it in that moment, but as a belief, it is generally there. Yeah.
As a belief, so the belief just kind of floats around in your cerebral cortex somewhere. Or
Well, you don't sit there and go, I'm alive, I'm alive, I'm alive, but you believe you're alive all the time.
right?
Okay, it's like that.
Do you believe in Jesus hard enough?
I don't know what
Often
hard
enough.
enough means.
I know, I don't either. I'm just
I
asking.
don't know what often enough means either.
Statistically.
I am thoroughly persuaded. Like if you ask me my
Mhm.
persuasion level, I'd say 100%.
Okay.
Okay.
How about over the last year?
What about it?
24-hour periods, days,
Uh-huh.
average. How often have you believed in Jesus?
Once.
No, I want the average, daily
Yeah, once.
average past year.
No,
One
only
time.
once. I've only believed in Jesus one time my entire life.
Well, thank God that's over with, I guess.
It just never stopped.
Oh, I see.
It's one continuous belief. It hasn't faltered in some way. So it's one time.
Examine yourself and see that you are in the faith. Am I in the faith? Are you in the faith? Are you in
I
the
don't know.
faith?
It says examine yourself, not Richard examine
Oh,
St. Tommy. It doesn't
okay.
read that. So I
Okay.
don't
Well,
know.
quick, folks, it never giggle at another man's circumcised heart. That's just good etiquette.
There you go.
Yeah.
Peace and respect, Ronan Kanushi. Thanks for coming in. Feel free to speak when you like, please.
Okay, thank you for having me.
I've never had you.
Are you saying you've never been intimate with Ronan?
I have not. We have had intercourse several times, but I've never been intimate with him.
Social intercourse. I see.
Oh yes,
I see.
repeatedly. Mostly on Brojo's channel.
I'd like to get back to what Mac the Human was chatting. Well, you all were chatting.
The
And
floor is yours.
what's that?
The floor is yours.
Well, yeah. Well, he mentioned this one girl who was born with a defect, blindness, and her theist foster parents would hand her a Bible every day. You don't believe enough, And I forget how he labeled it. But the thing is, isn't that the whole idea? You don't believe you're fallen, you're weak, you just need more faith. It sounds like anybody trying to indoctrinate young children into theism. I saw a movie or a clip of a movie where the children went to camp, like a Jesus camp, and the lady, she was, I call it guilting, guilting the children. You're born sinners. You are broken. And the children were crying, and it was heartbreaking to hear that lady tell these children they are flawed and they'll never be anything. You are worthless. You are nothing. To that degree.
Is that called
the floor was mine? The floor was mine.
Is that indoctrination?
Tommy,
The
if you don't
floor was
mind, he
mine.
wasn't finished.
Mr. Host.
Oh my God, moderator Al3. Excuse me.
Hey, I can leave, dude. I mean, you don't want to show respect. You love God so much. Why don't you show some respect, you hypocrite? Anyway, and these children were crying, and I thought, that memory when Mac was bringing up those foster parents, guilting that child for not having enough faith. So indoctrination is part of it, and so is failure, apparently, within that mindset. You know, you are suffering, you are broken, you are nothing. But for, but for if you believe in this boogeyman that you have to fear so he can love you. And I'm saying to myself, okay, that just doesn't appeal to me. Okay, I'm done. Thank you.
So Ronan, what do you make of the Bible verses that address that?
I don't know. I wouldn't. I'm not to that degree of knowledge or scholarship. So, like I said, I'm just comparing things, right? What was said by Mac and what I remember from that movie, and I'm triangulating actually, and I'm realizing that this whole concept was based on trying to indoctrinate people by force using fear. And I'm saying, okay, that's understandable at that point in our evolution as a species. I'm not faulting. I'm not faulting anyone. I'm saying that's just part of traditional behaviors coming out of animal behavior where we originated.
Well, I'll fault them because we're supposed to be more aware and more conscious of ourselves and conscious of others and conscious of our environment for that matter. Being a relatively aware beings, we should be. Although I have to agree with you that traditionally, this is often the view that is held, what you've described here tonight and what Mac was talking about within Christianity. The only issue that I have with it is it can't be justified from the Bible.
Oh. Well, wait a minute. Isn't sinning and forgiveness part of the Bible?
Well, I don't know how many Christians you've ever spoke to about the Bible or sin or grace. But if you wanted to start a conversation in that direction, I would have it.
No, but I just made the point. Isn't that part of it? Everything, the umbrella, if you will, is sinning and forgiveness.
Okay.
That's the point. I mean, that's the point of the explanation within that text and in context. So again, it's like, oh, okay, that just derived from that perspective. Okay, that's just history. That's part of tradition. Again, we all have to learn. I'm learning. I'm trying to refine my approach. Right, I'm still fundamentally who I am, but again, I'm just trying to be more civil, I guess.
Are you born again and don't know it, Ronan?
No, I was born.
Are you born again?
To be born again would be to abandon who I am and accept something nebulous to me.
Oh.
Again, that's how you perceive it. That's okay. I mean,
I'm just asking. God knows. I don't know.
No.
Ronan born again? I don't know. What do you say, Richard? Yeah.
I'll believe whatever he professes about himself. When it
You'd
comes to
better. You'd better. Yeah, that would probably be best.
I'll accept the evidence he gives me.
Are you born again, Richard?
Yes. February the 8th, 2012. About 6:30 at night.
Ping. Yay. Well, Ronan, gee, you got flustered. Did you threaten to quit, Ronan? Were you going to quit? A respect quit?
Tommy, you did speak over him.
Oh, is that unorthodox in this neighborhood? I just asked a question. I blurted out a little inquiry. I said, "Is that indoctrination?" I guess he wasn't through. Did you, Ronan? Did you threaten to quit? You did you?
Well, yeah, I figured, Madsen, was respected by you, and I assumed incorrectly because Mr. Madsen said, you have the floor, and I'm speaking to him,
Oh, I see.
not you. I'm not
No,
talking to
no,
you.
no.
I'm having fun calling you out here, so if, the drama comes with it. Now, you're not going to man up and change. You're powerless. You are powerless.
Really?
You are powerless to change and control that, like I am. Okay, so
For
let's move.
asking
So
one question
so let's
when
move
you
on.
still have the floor, I'm
So
powerless. Oh
let's
my
move
God.
on. So let's move on. If
Okay.
you already showed, how you stand, with Mr. Madsen. So if this is going to be the same, chaos, hey, so let's go. Have fun.
What? I want to observe local parliamentary custom here. I blurted out a question. I admit it. I'm guilty.
Thank you for that, Tommy.
Okay, nothing's going to change. So let's move on. Let's get back to the topic,
Okay.
please.
Okay. I might blurt out another question. Okay.
Yeah, no, no,
Okay.
yeah, I accept that. I accept that. I don't have to like it, but I accept it. I
Blurting out questions you accept. Got it.
no, I accept your character and behavior, like Mr. Madsen, like anyone else, good, bad, or indifferent. It doesn't matter. It's however that person is. I accept it. Okay, and
Look, man,
I
have
address
you
it.
been name calling me? Didn't you call me a hypocrite? I don't appreciate
Well,
that.
you are.
Appreciate it. So
You
what?
are.
So
You are.
you certified.
You profess things you don't practice, and that would be hypocritical, as the definition states. But again, I'm not saying to demean you. I'm saying okay, as a critique, this is what you are. Okay, I accept it. You want to pride yourself around it. Go ahead, man. I got no problem with that. That's
What
you.
what compels this compulsion to name call, Ronan? Are you suffering with post persecution stress disorder?
No, you're talking pre-heaven fears. That's what you talk. Okay, you like anybody else in theism is scared of their fate if they don't behave accordingly, and then when they claim they do and they're hypocrites, they get called out sometimes. You
Why
know.
are you upbraiding me?
No, I'm just
Well,
saying.
stop
I'm
it.
just saying.
You're sounding like a
I've known
bitch.
you long enough. I've known you long enough to say, okay, you got a pattern. I'm just mentioning it here. Because hey,
Are
look,
you butthurt?
I was
Are
trying.
you butthurt at me,
I
Ronan?
was
All
trying
right,
to
all right,
have.
guys.
I was
All
trying to
right,
have a
gentlemen,
civil
please.
conversation with Mr. Madsen here. And this
Gentlemen,
is
please.
his show. He is the host. This was the first time we've had intercourse. Okay. And I figured that you could, understand that. My apologies. My
So, gentlemen,
apologies.
if we could please move on,
Yes,
I'd
please.
appreciate it.
Please. I asked for that earlier.
I've said less than 100 words since I come on this place, and you're on
He
my
just
ass.
said, could we move on, please? Please, St. Tommy. He just said that. Could we move on, please?
I'd like to leave more space for both of you to speak more words and more useful words that are important to you and things you really think are true. That's what I'd like to know. So I want to facilitate something in a conversation like that. So Tommy, you said something like, we evidently are suffering and it does build us in some ways. And Ronan, I was wondering if you would agree with some statement like that. It doesn't have to be that exact thing. Be whatever you like.
Would you repeat the statement, please?
Do you think that our suffering causes brotherhood?
When we identify with someone, yes. I mean, that's why there are things called enemies. I mean, there are people who want their enemies to suffer. But, we are not going to suffer because we're working together on our side. And they're not going to suffer because they're working together on our side. And everybody wants everybody else to suffer. So, it's like, oh, okay. It's almost like circular reasoning because we're trying to survive fundamentally. That's all it is. We're trying to survive. So, yeah, we teach our children because we have them go out there and do yard work. You know, they're suffering pushing that lawnmower in that nice middle class neighborhood. Yeah, but they're suffering, but it's all, again, part of survival.
Yeah.
Fundamental. It's very fundamental.
Tommy, do you have anything to add to that?
To that, sure. No, I don't have anything to add to that.
Would you like to add something to your previous statement?
I have no addendum at this time. Thank you.
All right. So it seems to me that if you wanted to have a utopian society that was filled with human beings, some percentage of that society would need empathy and understanding of what actual suffering is. So it seems to me that if you were going to make heaven, you would need people to suffer but not in heaven. What do you think, Ronan?
It's like that black screen that Wild Heart Again had up, right?
Yeah.
That's heaven. There's nothing happening. You're there. Okay. But nothing happens. It's always the same. And I'm saying, well, that's the same thing as before I was born. Nothing. So to me, it's just the now. Okay. And I do understand, again, traditions, behaviors, social dynamics. And that's where I stand because that's how I perceive it from my vantage point. But I do accept that traditional behaviors are still with us. And there's nothing wrong with that as a foundation. But to develop from there and improve the foundation is most difficult from traditional behaviors. That would be along the lines of conservatism.
Okay, perhaps I could reframe that for you and get your opinion on it. Can you imagine a utopian society of human beings on this earth and in this time space?
No. Not with parameters that we observe in reality. No, that's not going to happen. It's nice. It's an ideal. I mean, it would be okay. I mean, it would be great, but no, it just doesn't work that way in reality.
I hadn't finished.
My apologies.
Oh, it's okay. Where they would need to understand what suffering is so they don't allow it.
No, as I understand it, a utopian society is developed over time to that goal and therefore maintain that equilibrium in a consistent manner throughout. So we would have already figured out, what to do and not to do in order to attain or maintain the goal.
Sure, but don't you think that there would be some necessary suffering in the process of developing a utopian society?
Well, yeah, like what we're doing now.
So, yes.
We're trying to develop to that point of utopia.
Oh,
Right.
shit.
Tommy, you seem to want to blurt something out. Please go ahead.
Oh, is blurting allowed? Of course it is. Yeah,
blurting is always allowed as long as we can be nice to each other. Sure.
It's got to pass the nice test. Okay, you can blurt if you're nice words. Gotcha. Do I have something to add to that? I blurted something out. Forgotten what it is. Sorry. Something about utopia, creating utopia.
The question that I posed to Ronan was, in the process of building a utopian society, would suffering be something that would be, well, actually, I'd like to add to it, natural?
So if God
Hey.
was building a utopian society, would he include suffering? I would check yes.
I would think so,
I
and I
would
think
hope
this
so.
is that suffering.
How's your personal suffer meter, Richard, compared to the worldwide average?
I don't know the answer to that, but I can talk about my experience of other people where if I was suffering on a possible scale of 10 and I put the average person about 5 or 6, then I'd have to call myself a 0.00001
Wow.
because I barely suffer at all for anything.
Have you got lack of guilt, lack of suffering guilt? Have you heard of that?
Actually, I do.
Yes. That happens to veterans in foreign wars sometimes.
Yeah, actually, I do. It seems almost, well, it's definitely unfair definitionally how much I've been benefit by information outside of myself. But it seems so very, very lopsided how much I see people suffering and how much I don't. And I feel like it's not exactly, a level playing field. Peace and respect, Space Cadet.
I think everybody suffers to a degree, but you're saying that you're way down on that scale. I'm saying I don't know because I do know you smoke cigarettes, and
Yeah.
obviously I fear for your well-being, and I'm imagining or hoping that you have the genetic profile that allows you to smoke until you're the day after you die, if it comes down to it, in 120 years lifespan. Which in other words, I'm wishing you the best.
Yes.
But you don't know. I mean, you don't know tomorrow. Like I don't know tomorrow. Someone said to me, and well, okay, you may be at a good spot, Overton window currently, but I can't predict the future.
Right.
So from my perspective, we all suffer equally in the now, equitably. Some people, have it harder. Cancer patients. Some people have it easier. Yourself, right? But we all, to that degree, are in the now and suffering because I'm going to get hungry within time. Right? You're going to need some sleep. Someone else is going to have to visit a doctor. Like everybody in the now has to address their reality.
Peace and respect, Odin.
Good evening, gentlemen. How are y'all doing?
Good evening, good evening, Batman.
Thank you. Thank you.
Batman. Okay, every time I meet you, that's going to happen.
Bring it. Bring it.
I just came up with it. Okay, I can't help it. Anyway.
St. Tommy,
I'm
progenitor
thrilled.
of grace and love.
I'm thrilled, Odin, that you're here. And in marvel of your courage and just personally emoting and glad you're here. I love you.
Love you too,
So
bro.
necessarily in this order, I'd love to hear, Halcyonic, what you have to say about the idea of suffering being necessary to a future utopia in human beings, and Odin the same. If Halcyonic doesn't have anything to say.
Well, I'm just not sure. That actually is what brought me in, is that topic. But the idea that it's almost like what I'm hearing is like it's almost like it's going to be required for this particular setting and way of life, but somehow not for others. I mean, it seems like any way of life we choose, utopian or otherwise, there's going to be suffering somewhere. It's inherent to the human condition to suffer over some things. So
Well, that's a good idea. We
it's
should
built
define
in,
what suffering is. No,
Oh,
you
what's
make a
that?
good. We should define what suffering is. What we mean by suffering.
I mean, suffering, there's all kinds of, there's a lot of different kinds of suffering. There's emotional suffering, there's physical suffering, there's stress of various kinds, there's strife of various kinds. I mean, um, I'm just not sure why a utopian society would necessarily be like, you know, without it. Or on the other hand, you know, I think any type of life anywhere is going to have some suffering in it, just regardless, because it's built into our lives and into us to suffer. I mean, for some things. So
Okay, so I want to quantify what I mean by suffering. Suffering is something that you would remember as being a bad experience 5 years from the event. All things
okay, and
being
that's more like
equal,
trauma, what you're like describing, you know.
possibly.
I mean, if you remember it and you suffer because you've remembered it, and the memory brings back feelings of suffering, I would think that that's almost like a PTSD response.
Well,
You know?
it's hard for me to include like I tear a fingernail and my finger bleeds, and although it hurt real bad at the moment and I really didn't like it, it's hard for me to call that suffering because that's not what I mean by suffering. You know what I'm saying?
Okay, so you're
It would
talking
have
about
to
like
be
a more
bad enough
profound sort of
suffering.
a,
Yeah, yeah,
like the remembrance of someone who died that you cared about, or some injustice that was done
sure,
and never righted, that sort of thing.
sure. Or it could have been physical if it was bad
Okay.
enough to remember, you know, disfavorably 5 years from now. It could have
Like an
been physical
accident or
or mental
something,
or
and
anything.
yeah.
Sure,
Yeah, or a loss of some kind. I mean, there's a lot of different kinds of loss that can be had in life. So yeah, I mean,
absolutely.
so we've defined it a little bit. So now where do we go?
Well, I'm not certain the kind of suffering I'm talking about would be inherently necessary because we're human beings. Like like I've known a few women who became pregnant and birthed a child by natural childbirth without any kind of, you know, relief medications or whatever, or pain management. And then later they did it again. So it seemed like it was a choice. They had a choice with the first one and the second one. Even with the experience, they chose to go through that amount of suffering more than once. You know, so I have
I've
to
heard
say
this. Yeah.
that's not suffering. It's a lot of pain and my goodness, but I can't call it suffering if you could choose it on purpose.
I mean, there's an odd like camp out there of people who think that childbirth must include the pain that comes with it, and that you should not like dull it or remove it, because they think that amount of pain will, you know, do something positive for the person who's bearing the pain. Like it'll make them stronger, or whatever, you know. And so I don't know. I mean, I guess it's just a personal choice, but I mean, they're still suffering in the moment, but you're right about choosing it, right? That's so I don't know, maybe they're a little bit masochistic, you know.
Maybe so. I mean, definitionally, it seems like they definitely have to be a little bit masochistic to do that twice, right? Okay, so, oh gosh, it's hard to say on the offshoot topic you brought up there. Some people say there might be something to that, and then it might be absolute rubbish. And it might even just depend on the individual. Like cults are built on investment. That's how you get intelligent people to do stupid things and believe stupid things. Is you get them lightly invested and you keep building on the investment. So maybe if a woman absolutely went through the total deal in childbirth, and let's say it was a good long birthing process, like 12 hours or 30 hours or something, they might be less likely to kill the child when it's like 14 and does something stupid. I don't. Maybe. I don't know. They might have
Like
something.
what
there.
I went through to bring you into this world. Kind of
Yeah, I'm not going to kill you easy because of my investment. Right. Right. But I'm half kidding. But I'm only half kidding. There could be value in that. I don't know. Thanks for laughing at my stupid joke. What about Odium? What do you got, man? Odian, Batman, or whatever.
Well, I'll just kind of state. I'll just kind of state like the base of what I believe in. Just in general, in regards to, I guess, just existing and suffering. I think as long as you're like not essentially got this all-encompassing singularity that's perfect, right? Because when I use singularity, I mean like
Right.
perfect, right? In that sense, there will always be a form of suffering. Suffering being in the form of not necessarily pain, right? But if you are conscious, right, you are lacking in something.
Mhm.
So as long as you're lacking and you know that there is better, I think that you will suffer because you're going to want more.
Interesting.
So as it relates to human beings, then do we have to suffer before before, or if it's necessary for us to suffer first before we reach a utopia? I would say yes, and I think that's something that's kind of inherent with human beings, right? I remember reading this article where it says, like, basically like 100 billion humans have
Could you
been.
pause for a moment, Odin?
Sure.
Could you pause for a moment? I'm sorry to interrupt you. Does someone have Wildheart just woke up in his stream playing on YouTube? Maybe I do. Oh my goodness, I do. That is horrible. Okay, it's off. Peace and respect. Welcome, Rage.
Hey, what's up,
Please
yo?
continue, Odin. Sorry about that.
Yeah,
Go
no
ahead,
problem.
Odin. Sorry.
But yeah, I think suffering is just this thing that's just gonna be inherent as long as you're not like a perfect singularity. And I think that when it comes to humans, suffering being necessary for us to form a form of utopia. I think that's something that's definitely necessary, mainly because we are not born with perfect knowledge when it comes to anything. Our behavior, morals, all of that stuff. And so a lot of it is really trial and error. And unfortunately, trial and error, even when it comes with interactions between each other, is going to result in a lot of suffering for others, whether it's intentional or not.
Okay, so Knock, you're caught up. You want me to catch you up?
Yeah, I'm not sure. Like, I get we're talking suffering maybe in relation to utopia, but yeah, you can kind of catch me up a little bit.
No, that's it. Want to hear your thoughts. Do you think it would be necessary that those in a utopian society understood at a personal level what suffering is?
No, I mean, well, me personally, the way I've always looked at like utopia would be an attempt to void suffering as much as possible, right? So, like in theory, if you look at communism, I see communism as like a utopian idea. In practice, not so much, right? But like in theory, communism, you're trying to take away suffering, and you're trying to equal it out, make sure like people aren't suffering. So I think in a utopia society, the goal would be to end suffering. Now, would you need suffering to get to that utopia society? I think most certainly so. But yeah, like in regards to my idea of what a utopia society would be, I would say the suffering had already been done, and utopia would be void of it.
I would have to agree with. I could
Hopefully that
agree with something
fit,
like that. No, that works fine. That works fine. as so long as by suffering you don't mean physical pain, because there would always be some kind of
Yeah.
physical pain.
Yeah, exactly. What I'm talking, probably because I did come in, I just got out of work not too long ago, so I'm coming in pretty cold to this. But I did hear
That's
you
cool.
kind of describing what you meant by suffering, and I would say the same thing. Like to me, suffering is something that's unnecessary, and just normal physical pain is necessary.
Sure. In fact, I heard, I don't know much about it. Don't quote me. I'm not an official. I've heard that there are people who are born without the ability to understand physical pain. Their brain just doesn't register it. And because of it, they actually hurt themselves quite often. They don't realize they're hurt.
Yeah,
and
I knew
can
somebody.
compound injuries.
I knew somebody that claimed to be like that. Like they claimed they couldn't feel any physical pain and would go out of their way to prove it. Now, I never saw any like diagnosis or anything scientific that stating that this
Right.
person had something special about them. But I do believe that there is, some people out there that don't experience pain.
Wow.
There's if I could interrupt for just a second and throw something in there. There's a little girl, and I forget her name. I believe she's British, and I think she's probably about 10 years old by now. She is the only person that is on record so far to have this strange genetic anomaly where she not only does not feel physical pain, but doesn't really get injured from the physical like altercations she might get into. Like she was hit by a car and dragged 100 feet, and she had a cut on her lip, and she walked away from it with no other injuries. She also doesn't feel the need to sleep, and she doesn't feel pain. I already said the pain thing. Oh, and also she doesn't get hungry. Like she has there's like certain things in her brain that are just not enabled. So they're like turned off or something. And her family has to like kind of force her to eat because she's not hungry. They have to kind of force her to sleep because otherwise she just wouldn't. She'd just be awake all the time.
Wow.
It's Googleable. She'll pop up right away if you. I mean, I'm looking at that going, can I have some of that, please? I wouldn't mind at all.
I don't know. It might be handy in a lot of ways, and it might be really awful in other ways. It'd be hard to say until you were there, I think.
True.
Yeah, you know what? It's funny because this was years ago. I'm gonna see if I can find this article for you, Richard, and send it to you. Basically, it was this Jewish writer who was speculating as to why humans suffer in relation to God, and it's funny because I'm just summing up what he said from what I remember, so it could be the complete opposite. But essentially, what he says, from what I remember, was that one of the main reasons God essentially reinforces that when we make decisions as humans, we make them out of love, and love is in consideration for others, is because he knew inherently, right, that the way how he created us, we're going to suffer one way or the other.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And understanding that we have free will, how we choose to deal with that suffering, right, there's a good possibility that we could lash out at each other or even at ourselves. And so I think the idea of grounding, whether it's morals or certain ideals, in love, for example, love not necessarily just being limited to loving other people and stuff like that, but also yourself, because that's super important as well. If you love yourself, there's just certain things you just won't do to yourself, or have you won't have been done to you, right? Self-preservation is important if you want to preserve the life of others, for example. So that's what I took from it. It was a really interesting read. It was a super long read, but it was pretty interesting.
Feel free to look it up and link it for people who are interested in everything you just said.
Yeah, I'm gonna see if I can find it.
Okay, who wants to take over and run the show for a minute while I go have a cigarette? Who wants to do that? Anybody?
With great power
Halcyonic.
comes great responsibility.
Halcyonic, would you do that? Space Cadet, will you do that?
I was actually about to exit stage left because I got a
Aw.
chow.
But I like your brain. Why are
I
you gonna
I
leave?
could reinsert my brain into the picture in about 15 minutes.
Would you?
Mm-hmm.
I'll be back from a smoke break by then, though.
All right.
Odin.
Mm-hmm.
Ronan. How about Ronan? Ronan, you want to run this while I go have a smoke?
Well, yeah, I can do nothing while I wait. Sure.
Ronan can behave.
Just ask people
yeah,
questions that you think are interesting. Just find out what you want to know about people.
Just hand the kid the keys to the hot rod, right? I'll be right back. Yeah. Ah.
Oh man. But yeah, I think that's a pretty interesting question. And you know what? I think this is why, for example, we really need critical thinking to like actually be a subject to be taught in schools, regardless of whichever school, private or public. Because and we need like actual philosophical teachers or public preachers, so to speak, on various topics.
I agree with that. I don't understand why philosophy is something taught in college and why it's not introduced to people at a much younger age. Like maybe had I been introduced to it, in middle school or junior high, I would have developed a passion for it instead of waiting until I'm 43 trying to catch up with all the, armchair philosophers out there that know far more than I do. Like it doesn't seem like we place much stock in what's important in this country. Like they make you learn all this stuff that you don't need to know, but when it comes to stuff like I think that you probably should know, it doesn't seem so important.
I think all children should be taught the fundamentals of criminal investigation and forensics. That's an inquiring mind, not what I think of it as this or that philosophy, but to teach a child question everything and then put them through whatever series of tests, and then have them develop their analytical skills.
Well, I agree with you, but up to a certain extent, right? Like I think having healthy skepticism is important, right? But promoting the idea of just merely being skeptical for the sake of being skeptical, right? It seems like an unnecessary fix for a problem that doesn't really exist, if that makes any sense.
Oh, yeah, I agree with that.
Nope, not one bit. Not one bit. Children cannot be philosophers. They don't have experience base. They don't.
No. I'm not suggesting. I'm not suggesting that.
Well, no, but see, the idea of critical thinking skills, I mean, that's why we're taught math or fundamentals of grammar, for example. But why not, have them, go through forensics or criminal investigation or just pre-law, something that, the individual can use as a tool to figure things out.
I mean, I get what you're saying, but that's super specific.
Yeah.
Right? With critical thinking, right? Teaching you how to think logically, it's more generalized than it. So here's the interesting thing: what a lot of people probably don't notice about critical thinking. There's tools that you possess inherently. You use them every single day. You don't notice them, right? For the most people don't notice them, right? But you do use them. The only difference is when you learn critical thinking, for example, right? You're now cognizant of these tools, right? They are more sharpened and you can improve on them, and it allows you to make better decisions, right? Whether it's for your life, for loved ones and stuff like that, right? And and like you're suggesting, Ronan, right? It'll make it actually way easier for people to get into those fields that require investigation, right? Or if even if they just want to study that
Mhm.
field for personal purposes.
Yeah, I agree. There are programs, especially like if you're running on kind of the wrong side of the law, as a teenager, there are programs to where you can be invested into, riding with police officers, seeing how they, you know, how certain elements of how they deal with certain elements of society. Some, programs designed to wake kids up, and I think that, to Odian's point, if we were teaching kids logic, if we were teaching kids how to think critically and how to tell their own inconsistent thoughts, and tell, pretty much self-analyze themselves, then that would lead to a lot more people making better decisions, and probably a lot more people actually going into these more advanced fields of forensics or investigative work, because they've been prepped to think critically from a young age. Yeah,
Yeah.
I grew up in North Carolina. We didn't have the best education system, and I still don't think that they have a very good one. In regards to the rest of the country, that's something that I've always wished. Like I said, I'm 43 years old. I'm trying to catch up on philosophy because it was never a thing that I was taught ever. It was just never anything that was promoted, something that was even really considered down there. And I think that that's a huge flaw in society right now.
Yeah, and it's funny because like um growing up pretty much my whole life, right, I was surrounded by theism, right? Most people who I knew were theists. When I say theists, they believe in God. Doesn't necessarily mean they're like religious, right? Um, Mostly Christian, obviously, and I I never cared for it. I never believed in well, I never believed in any form of God. I was just like agnostic. I didn't really think the question was even important to answer, right? Um, Growing up, um, and I was raised in the Caribbean, so they did teach some critical thinking classes. Um, it was optional. But it wasn't that, even having it back then, right? I didn't super take them that seriously, but they were useful. And like becoming an adult, and and one day, I decided, what, let me see if I can answer this question for myself. What makes the most sense, right? And so it's a matter of, you have to understand, quite a few things, right? um you know what would you consider evidence for something? Okay, when you compare two situations, right? Should I treat these two situations the same if I basically took away all the meat and I look at the bones, right? Are they the same thing? Am I giving these things the same credence, right? Um, you know, and understanding that, listen, there's just certain things that you just can't prove, or you're most likely never going to be able to prove it, right? And so, the idea of just like, for example, making claims and saying, hey, this is the case, right? You're basically, you're going to be required to provide sufficient evidence to support it. But even if you do state what you believe, right? I think you have to accept that people are going to want you to justify your belief, right? I mean, it's a choice, if you want to do yes or no. But I think if it's a situation where you're presenting something about yourself, a belief, whether it makes sense or not, right? You should be able to at least explain why you hold this position, right? And so, you know, just doing a butt ton of reading, conversations on all these different isms and ists, right? I ended up becoming a Christian, right? Because that was what made the most sense to me and what was more useful to me individually, right? Um, and so, whenever people, might ask me, okay, what do I think about these things or that, or if they'll make a certain claim, I'll be like, listen, I don't know. This is just what I think that makes the most sense. Now, if you want me to get in, to explain why I think it makes the most sense, given, my views on whatever evidences that was provided, I can do that. But I'm not going to sit here and tell you that something is the case and I have absolutely no way of proving it or, disproving the opposite of it. Right. And so how I realized that was through critical thinking. The issue that a lot of people have, regardless of their position, right, is that they hold strong positions, and I don't think they really think too deeply about the implications of holding those positions as it relates to to their lives and stuff like that. Like I remember a gentleman asked me, okay, since you know hold to the the growing block theory of time, how do you parse that with, for example, being someone who is, who loves Zen Buddhism, right? How does that affect the way how you live, right? How, do you make plans and do you make predictions and this and that, right? And, believe it or not, that was something that I actually sat and thought about. Like, okay, how should I live my life now that I think this makes the most sense? What are the implications? You see what I'm saying? Like, those are the fruits that that will bear from critical thinking. You don't just you know get answers and you just stay there, right? Your answers is gonna um, result in having more questions that require answers.
But are you
So
moving forward?
uh,
I say, but are you moving forward?
oh yes,
Good.
I'm always moving forward. I always say that if it's the case where what I believe theologically is the case, right? And I guess if I succeed in spending, I don't know, I guess maybe eternity or whatever, being conscious and being able to do stuff, right? I think I would want a reset button, because even if I was to learn every single thing about, you know, existence, right? Once I reach that cap, what happens after that?
Teach.
I mean, if everyone else is learning the same shit than me, just like me, then, for me, it's about the experience, right? I guess if I'm teaching and I get new experiences, that could be beneficial.
Well, I think that's the funny thing about humanity, though, is that you can teach the same thing to all these different humans, and all these different humans are going to learn it differently. They're going to learn it in a different way. I'm trying to stretch for an example, and I can't think one off of hand, but I think my point is fairly apparent in reality. You take philosophy, like you mentioned earlier. Philosophy is led you to Christianity, and I think that philosophy is something that Christians often use to justify their Christianity a lot of times. But then again, there's a lot of people out there that use philosophy and they used it to get away from Christianity. The very same exact things probably that led you to Christianity led them away from Christianity. So I think human beings learn differently, even when they're learning the same thing.
Yep.
That's just evidently true. That needs no proof.
Right.
Batman, you were talking about, well, you made the point Well, everyone else is learning the same thing. What do you do after that? Someone said teach, and I thought build. You build after that. Einstein said, imagination is more important than knowledge. And Sir Isaac Newton said, if I have seen further, it was because I stood on the shoulders of giants. So you build. If everybody knows the same thing, there's somebody in there is going to imagine something and build on that. That's what we do in our species. We build, keep building forward.
Yep. You
I got
know,
I got a
go ahead.
theological question for you, and you'll forgive me, Batman. I don't know everything that you think is true,
Mhm.
but this is kind of simultaneously an inquiry. Why would any guardian angel have any right to speak on our situation had they not experienced it?
Um, Honestly, I don't know. I think it's a situation where uh, speaking on our situation, they can only speak from it from the perspective of I guess, like, loving and caring about us, um, as fellow sentient beings, right? Because they could suffer, right? But I
Mm.
don't think they suffer in the same way we do, because their existence is totally different than ours, right? And so if you haven't experienced, at least, physically, what I've experienced, then how can you vouch for me, right?
Yeah, well, yeah, I think it's like the same. I've never experienced slavery, but I can have an opinion about slavery. I can teach people against slavery, right? So even though I've never experienced it, I think
Yeah.
like when speaking of a guardian angel, if we're speaking of like a supernatural being that would have, I would assume that they would have some kind of higher knowledge that even if they hadn't experienced a thing, they could understand it, because I think humans can do that, and we would be beneath such a supernatural being.
But wouldn't it be true that there's a difference between empathy and sympathy, and why we have different words for it? And
Hmm.
although
Hmm.
sympathy can be majestic and powerful in itself, I think empathy is just. Um, I'm sorry, empathy can be fine too, but I think sympathy is more advantageous to the personal experience, and it gives you depth of understanding you otherwise wouldn't have.
I think both are vital, but I think I would tend to agree with you. I don't tend to have much sympathy, and I think it's a character flaw. To where I have too much empathy, and I think that that's a character flaw. So I think I tend to agree with you, Richard.
At least it seems true for me that okay, just say a stubbed toe, and I'd never had one. I can speak about the theory or act on the theory of what I've heard a stubbed toe is, but do I really understand it? If I haven't experienced it myself, like I've never had a permanent injury. I don't suffer from any kind of like permanent physical pain. I just
Hmm.
don't have one of those. But like knock, you obviously do have something that's at least semi-permanent, and that's got to be a completely different experience for you than what I've had. And can I say I understand your position? You know?
Yep. And so, I think a lot of it has to do,
Yeah.
with the advocacy aspect of it, right? Like, you don't need to necessarily go, experience someone's terrible experience in order to advocate for them, right? I think,
I agree.
I think it's definitely possible that idea, Richard, is grounded in, um, showing the best, um, of that person, regardless of what life they might live, right?
Sure.
So just because someone might be a thief throughout his whole life, okay, you know, sure, he made a conscious decision to steal, right? But what else did he do with his life? What did he do with the things that he stole? Um, you know, why did he steal, right?
Hmm. Yeah, like I'm kind of mixed on this, Richard. I think I kind of agree with both of you here, because I think that you can, you can not experience something and still empathize with it. But then, as you were saying, Richard, like the sympathy part, like I ran into this roadblock recently. A lot of people, as I've tried to explain, like the emotions behind, Smokey going after my kid and stuff, and they'll be like, Smokey comes after me too, and I'm like, well, unless you have a child and you've had that child attack, you can't possibly really understand what I'm trying to tell you here, and so it often feels like I'm speaking to just brick walls oftentimes when I'm trying to describe it. You mentioned my pain, like when I speak about my pain and I try to describe it to people that haven't experienced chronic pain, it's like talking to deaf ears. They can't really understand it. But I think that you can empathize with it if you've experienced pain in your life and you can imagine, that pain just never going away. It's just hard for people to get there if they haven't experienced it themselves.
I think that was good definition. That was really good. Thank you.
Getting back to the concept of guardian angel, I thought, well, the angel doesn't necessarily have to have experienced, bad things. The angel just understands what is acceptable to the person, and everything else is not acceptable. Anything that questions what the angel believes to be best for the person, right, does not have to be experienced by the angel, which gets back to this statement about empathy, right? Or for that sake, sympathy. I can understand if the angel had experienced it, but all the angel has to know is what's best for the person, and everything else is unacceptable.
I'd like to think that the best leadership would deeply understand my current position, right? And if they didn't, then they couldn't be really good at, and I might not even feel like they're a leader of mine because they don't understand me, But I think to really understand someone, you got to be where they are. You've got to have at least been where they are right now, or been where they've been to really understand it. And I think that's why you'll see things like, and the claim that a man who can't become pregnant has no right to speak on female anatomy autonomy and things like right to life versus right to choice, right? They should have no right to speak about it. And why? Because they can't experience it. And I think that's not totally invalid.
Be right back, guys. Give me 1 second.
All right, so when it comes to things like that, when it comes to we'll just go with abortion and women's rights, and I think that it's important for men, even though we haven't experienced, to speak up on the side of women, especially because there's going to be plenty of men out there speaking against the side of women on that issue. And when you look at just the recent history of this country, it was very recent when women received equal rights under the law. So there's still just elements within our society that's going to lead to just natural sexism within our society. So I think that it's important for men, even though we haven't experienced pregnancy, of course, to stand alongside with women, and the more men, the better, because of the dynamics and the history of the country we live in.
No, that's absolutely true. The majorative group has to support the minority group in the oppression in order to defeat it. By definition, it's a minority group. Thereby, someone has to stand up for them, if that makes sense.
Exactly, and the more equality women get, they can stand for themselves more legitimately. But this country still has so far to go, and we see a lot of elements trying to kind of drag us backwards, and it's going to take all of us to fight against that. So I definitely think that's why I advocate for LGBTQ plus people. That's why I advocate for women, and I consider myself a feminist, even though I haven't experienced those myself. I can advocate for them because I think it's vitally important that I do so.
And we should. Although I have to argue with you one point. It's not just this society. It's
Oh
the
yeah,
whole
sure.
planet. It's the whole planet.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah.
You know, that's kind of like the crux of my, isolationism when it comes to my anti-war stance, because I don't think that we should be involved in foreign wars, but at the same time, we are a global community now. So at some point, the global community is going to have to involve themselves if we actually want to end global wars, right? So it's a conundrum of my ideology that I'm facing with myself.
Well, if no one had a gun to point at me, or no one would point a gun at me, I wouldn't need a gun to point back.
Oh, I'm with
If
you
we
there,
all
my man.
decided simultaneously just to drop the whole idea of warring and have a lot of talks and figure out logically what we need to do for the peoples of each country, of each landmass, what have you, it would just be a lot smarter.
Wait, I mean, back to that original conversation about utopia. My personal utopia has always been a gun-free, war-free world. If we can get there, to me, that's utopia.
It'd be a good start.
Yeah, I mean, I think I don't know, man. Like the idea of utopia, that's something I don't even really entertain. I think as long as there are conscious entities that exist within that world or society, I think
Mhm.
there'll always be conflict. There'll always be justification of conflict.
I agree.
Like,
I totally agree. I think given human dynamics, just what we can observe about human beings,
yeah.
utopia is an impossibility.
I mean, shit. If you look in the Bible, right? These supreme beings, or they're essentially gods compared to us, right? Like, they go to war, they get jealous, they get angry, they come down to experience things we're experiencing as humans, and you know they essentially they have eternal life, right? Functionally, they'll be able to live forever, but yet still they do stuff even though they want for nothing, I guess physically maybe, right? um, that get them into trouble, and they essentially have utopia available to them.
I don't share all of your exact reading frame, as you probably already realize.
Oh yeah.
Like, oh, you don't know me at all.
You're right.
But even conceding to your overall, the spirit of what you were saying rather than the exactness of what you said. Unless the goal is actually righteous, in which case we may not even right now understand what it is that is being written about.
Hmm.
Okay, if you'll concede that, I'll agree with all the rest.
Oh yeah. Um, the funny thing about righteousness is that righteousness doesn't necessarily um, um, it doesn't necessarily equal the justification
Oh,
to
you're going to have to expound on that.
yeah. All right. So for example, right? Let's say a man attacks me and I'm armed, right? And I'm a good shoot, right? And he does damage to me. Now, let's say we tussle or whatever, and he's basically at my mercy at that point, right? I can end this man's life, or I can injure him, right? Those are the two options that I have, right? Um, if I let's say I decide to end his life, right? Um, in my head, I could, as far as I'm concerned, that's righteous, right? Because he attacked me, right? And if I don't do anything about it, right, he's going to take my life. I love my life, right? And I'm sure there are ways that I could justify that. However, right? Remember, I have the option available to me. It might be harder, right? It might be a little bit riskier, right? To just injure him, um,
Mhm.
to prevent him from attacking me and taking my life. Um, and so as a result, now I got to ask myself the question, which situation, am I more righteous in, right? Did my righteousness justify me taking this man's life?
Okay.
Does that make sense?
That's a great point. I think it's based upon what your definition of righteousness is, or to every human being, righteousness is something a bit different.
It's
'Cause
subjective.
yeah,
That's
exactly. When I'm going off of my atheist tirades, I'm being righteous, right? But a Christian listening, they don't think I'm being very righteous. They think I'm being blasphemous. So it's a matter of interpretation, really.
Okay. If I compared it to being a parent,
mhm.
and there's no set standard guidebook saying, okay, when your child does this, you do this and it will work. There's no such book. um, so we're all just, as adults raising children, we're all just kind of winging it and hoping for the best, and hopefully we don't mentally scar our child too much on a regular basis, and they'll be okay later. uh, and that's pretty much all we can hope for. um, are we righteous when we do the best that we can in that situation, Odin?
um,
Or would it have to be objective? Would righteousness have to be objective to be righteousness?
no, I don't think there's, at least when it comes to non-singularity based beings, I don't think there's anything that's necessarily objective.
Then
Um,
killing the person or letting them live is righteous.
yeah.
Okay.
Well, let's see. Yeah, that's my view on it. I don't know if it's weird, but
Well, I think you made a great point, and I'll bring recent history into it, like Kyle Rittenhouse, right? Like, so Kyle Rittenhouse in the moment thought he was defending his life, so he thought he was righteous in that moment. Now he has a half of a country against him, and I'm one of those people. I'm not going to lie. I've actually had interactions with Kyle on Twitter, but I'm one of those people against him because I don't think it was righteous, but I do grant that Kyle Rittenhouse in that moment thought he was defending his life, and he thought it was a righteous he thought it was a righteous thing he was doing. So I think that you said the word subjective. I think righteous is subjective to the human being in their experience at the moment.
yeah.
I really don't know how to get around subjective morality in the first place.
See, that's what I'm saying. It's not necessarily. Um, it's hard to escape the moral aspect of it, right? But doing what's best, right? Um, just doesn't it doesn't necessarily mean it's it might be the best, right? Like if you did, if you might have done your best to make sure, for example, um, your uh, uh, this guy doesn't die, right? You did everything you can, right? But as long as the option exists,
Mhm.
right?
That's it right
That's it.
there.
That's it right there.
That's
As
it
long
right
as
there. Okay, so there was a story written and a movie based on the story that a person takes this certain drug and it heightens their awareness, and it heightens their ability to imagine possibilities. So they end up in a situation where in any given situation they see all possible possibilities at all times.
hmm
What
yeah, I
would
mean,
that do to a person?
you know what? That's super interesting because
Yeah.
it reminds me. it reminds me it reminds me of when I was reading Job, right? And I'm super paraphrasing here, you know. Um it's that particular scene when God kind of gave Job a tour of the heavens, and he's asking him a bunch of these questions and stuff like that, right? And so, the interesting thing was that it was during the time when Job, was really lamenting, and um, you know, uh, he's trying to get answers, and having the wider view, I believe, if you have access to all facets of reality, right? Um, then, you know, I guess you can throw the subjective card on it. Like if you can see every circumstance, um, if you can see
Mm.
every effect of that decision, right? And you think, and you make a decision that's for the greater good, even though right then and there it's bad, then at that point you can't really question it.
Yeah, I'll lead you to we're talking about Job. Richard started with a story that was made into a movie. I'll give you a really popular story, Dune, right? Like, so in Dune,
Hmm.
most people know like the first three books. In fact, for the longest time, I thought the first three books were like just the only main books, and then I realized Herbert wrote six. So in Dune, Paul Atreides, he can see all possible futures, and that
Hmm.
is, that gives him the ability to pretty much claim godhood. And then his son Leto, he becomes a god emperor, and he goes beyond that. But once you get to that sixth book, I can't remember the Atreides name at that point, but this dude, he could pretty much see every possibility within
Everything.
the moment, right? Like, so he would see everything that's going to happen before it happened, and be able to react before it happened to what was going to happen. And he murdered an entire planet. He killed
Yes.
everybody on that fucking planet, and it was insane. And I think that story really lays out your question, Richard. And if you haven't read it, it's 6 books. It's a journey, but I think that fiction can sometimes answer some of these really hard questions, because human beings have the ability to imagine the answers to these questions. You just got to
Yeah.
invest time to read it.
Yeah. And you know what? Whenever, because that's the interesting thing when you read the Bible, right? You will see, capital D Yahweh, like he'll do certain things and you're like, isn't there like a better way to do this? Right? Like, do all those people have to die? Okay, if they have to die, why do they have to die this particular way, where results in a lot of suffering and stuff like that, right? Like I asked those questions, right? And honestly, if this is a deity that has access to all of this information, right? And for me, I don't think the future exists. I think possible future exists. And so, if this deity has access, um, um, to see all these possible futures, right, and can, pick the one that's the best one for us in the long term, and he can, then I can't question it because I don't have access to that information. I don't know. What are your thoughts, Richard?
Quick interlude. I'm shilling a kind of a friend of mine's book,
Nice.
and you can find it. It's called Lemons. He is an interesting liar, and he is self-declared interesting liar. That is, he's a fiction writer.
Yeah, well, I was gonna say, all fiction writers are liars.
That's right. You get the joke. Great.
I'm a fiction writer, so
Yeah,
Me
yeah,
too.
I know. So he wrote a book. It's called Lemons. It's available at ghostofamerica.net, and I want to shill that real quick. Not that he really needs me to, or even asked me to, but anyway.
damn, I wish I had the
really
book.
interesting dude.
I have a book in my car. It's out in my car. My friend wrote it. I haven't read it yet. And so I would take this moment to show my friend's book, but damn it, it's in the
Oh.
car.
Well, too bad then you weren't ready.
Yeah.
Lemons is a story about a man who gets lost in a very large lemon orchard.
Interesting.
It's super weird, but he's a weird guy. I really like him. Okay, what was the last thing you said, Batman, about something about the Bible? And I need refreshed. Sorry.
No problem. No, so I was just kind of saying, there are many events, both good and and I guess bad based on my perspective, right? Where I'm like, couldn't God have handled this differently? For example, whenever he'll basically purge folks, right?
Yeah.
Let's call it for what it is. And they get purged in ways that are, obviously, unpleasant physically, painful, and cause some
the
kind
Christian
of temporary
reading of that is
suffering.
correct, that would be those things. Yes.
Yeah. Right. And so if those things are the case, right, then I'm going to ask myself, like, isn't there a better way to do this? Why did it happen this way? Right. And so, what I was saying was, long story short, was that I don't have access to all of the knowledge that
Sure.
this deity has access to.
Sure.
Right. So it doesn't make sense for me to question it. Now, if he gives me access to all of the information, right,
Well,
then that's a different story.
yeah.
Right.
Then I got more to say. Yeah.
Yeah, I got more to say, but since I don't, right, and this is coming from a guy who don't think the future exists. I think possible futures exist, right? And if this deity can perceive all of these possible futures and make a decision, right, that will generate the best outcome, right? Then I can't question it.
Okay. All right.
So I was just asking your thoughts on that.
But there would never be any way to know if that's the actual case of it, though, right? Because like you as the individual within that couldn't know the deity, all of the plethora of possibilities. You could only live the experience as you go through.
I mean, sure.
But that's
the paradox of it.
But no, that's greatly to our advantage. It leaves us choices, and we can have arguments. And those arguments and those choices are important. It's just like
within that element, though, could then the individuals within that element who aren't aware of those possibilities, that are questioning the outcomes of the reality they're living in, can they be punished for questioning those?
No, they don't get punished. You just heard too many Christians talk about it.
Well, I know. And Richard, I pretty much knew your question. I'm still not sure, Odeon. I'm assuming you're still a Christian.
Yeah. I mean,
you seem pretty cool.
God don't punish you for asking questions
or things you don't know.
Yeah, or things you don't know,
or denying.
No.
How about denying its existence within its absence?
I mean, plenty of people denied God's existence in the Bible. You don't see him going around punishing them.
See, that would be my thing, is like, if this God does exist, and I grant the possibility, I always have. I don't believe in any human gods. The closest one that I ever really truly came to believing in was like some Native American spiritualities, Walking Tonka, the Red Road. At one point I considered myself a Christian, but looking back on it, I don't think I ever truly believed in it. And several Christians have pointed that out, and I tend to agree with them. I probably didn't, but my thing has always been like this God. It's not going to judge me based upon the questions or my lack of faith in it. It's going to judge me based upon the life that I live. So, I would think that this thing would be above reproach, right? Like, it's not going to take my criticisms of what I read in the Bible or what I see some Christians act out within either YouTube or real life. It's not going to take that and judge me for that. It's going to judge me based upon the things that I do in life, how I raise my child. Am I a responsible father? Am I a responsible member of the community? So that's kind of where I've always stood. And I always enjoy Christians that will you can still have your Christian faith or whatever, but just agree with that premise. Like, this God is not so petty as to punish me for living within the existence that it gave me.
Yeah, see, that's the perks of it having access to all of this information, right? It can see you. Yeah, go ahead.
It's actually better. It's actually better than this, Knock. Have I ever presented to you my intended reader argument?
I don't think so, Richard. I mean, we've talked quite a bit, but I don't remember hearing that one.
Okay, just real quick, and I need to wrap this up because I just promised somebody I'd do like an hour or two of work for them. But
wait, I got to go to bed myself. So.
That all works out. Okay, let's just wrap this up with this final thought and your thoughts about this thought. If I were writing a set of instructions as far as like war tactics, dietary recommendations, how to treat people rough when you should, how to treat them with kindness when you should, and all of these qualifiers, it's obviously instructional. But there is no Christian practitioner that actually fulfills all the demands of the Bible, i.e., that means it was intentionally written to no one. Well, that doesn't make sense. But it could be intentionally written to someone who does it. But if I asked who actually performs everything demanded in the Bible, you only have one choice: Jesus. Now, that makes Jesus the intended reader, not Odin, not you. In other words, it's not even asking you to do things.
Well, yeah, and I think that's always been kind of my point, and I appreciate that, Richard. And I wish more Christians felt that way because place stock in your Bible, sure. I've often said this, Richard, and me and you've had the aliens conversation. I can read the Bible and I can interpret it in a lot of different ways. I can interpret Jesus to be a very hippie dude. That's gonna tell me to live life and love people, right? I can interpret Jesus to be a very harsh military-minded person if I wanted to. I can interpret the New Testament specifically to be a alien visitation story. I've laid it out in several videos, and me and Richard, we've had conversations about it that are fascinating conversations because you can. I think Bibles are written, spiritual texts are written to be interpreted by individuals and utilized by individuals in their own individual way.
In a subjective way, it is. But that's kind of my overall point is, although there might be something that the individual can glean from it, the individual who casually picks it up or even seriously picks it up, I mean casually versus the next thing I'm going to say, compared to Jesus's understanding or the hero's understanding of it would be very, very subjective, where the hero's understanding of it should be the actual understanding of it.
I mean, as an atheist, I can read the Bible and I can glean, what I would say is life certain truths from it, right? I can read the Bhagavad Gita and glean life certain truths, but I could also read Dune and I can read Harry Potter and do those same things. To me, spiritual texts are actually vitally important because I think that they lay out spirituality of humanity, and I think that it's important for humans to study as many of them as we can to get an understanding of spirituality and humanity as much as we can. And I've always tried to do that. And I think that's kind of always kind of been the blur with me as an atheist because I often talk to Christians, but I have such a broad experience with, spiritual texts that I'm oftentimes including all of theism into speaking to Christians.
I got two quick questions for you. Where is that battle located that you just spoke of, right? And
the battle, which one?
You were talking about you considering things.
That's never stops.
Where does that battle exist, and what's the best case scenario outcome?
For me personally is an ultimate understanding of truth. That's what I always strive for.
Why is truth so important to you?
And wait, where does that battle happen?
Within myself.
Within you. You just told me the story of Cain and Abel. Thank you.
Yeah. If you take it as an allegory.
Absolutely.
I would agree, definitely. What was your question, Odian? It was interesting.
Oh, I was asking, why is truth so important to you?
Because I think oftentimes truth gets fudged, and understanding truth should be important to everybody. And understanding truth of the reality of the world, not of the imagery we want of the world. And I think, especially here in America, if you live in America, you see it firsthand every day. People are so Americanized. They are so glamorized with the concept of America that we can do no wrong. You can see it in just the portrayals of the Ukraine right now. Like the outrage of what Russia is doing. Oh, how we forget what we did in Iraq and Afghanistan for 20 years. So I mean, I think that truth should be important, but oftentimes what we want to be truth becomes more important.
It's funny because I'm I'm super like I'm very wary of statements like that, particularly for myself, right? Mainly because I don't think most human beings are even remotely interested in what the truth has to offer, mainly because um, it doesn't really do anything for them. If anything, it's probably going to be super depressing, right?
Yeah,
Because
I agree.
right? So, it's like, do you want to know the truth for practical reasons, like to make better decisions about, our society, how we operate, stuff like that,
No,
right? Or is it, do you want to know the truth for like selfish reasons where it's for your own self, fulfillment intellectually or spiritually or whatever?
definitely the first one, and definitely I think, just like you said, like the truth of the reality of this world is very depressing. And I think the only way people are going to actually wake up and be willing to truly fight what's going on in this world is if they realize just how depressing it is. And we don't get the truth. I mentioned this in a stream recently. You hear about Ukraine, you hear about the outrages. I'm not going to speak on, because there are outrages to speak on there. I'm not saying there's not. But when's the last time you heard about Yemen? Like, we have, our hands are so bloody from the genocide that's going on in Yemen, the embargo Saudi Arabia has put on Yemen, but you never hear about it.
I
And
mean,
and our hands are directly involved in that. And you just, it's like if we truly understood the truth of the world, we'd have no choice but to react to it. And that's why people sleep, and that's why people want to be comfortable, and that's why people don't like me very much, because I'm not for that. I think truth is uncomfortable, and we need to be uncomfortable.
I mean, think of it this way, right? Like, because let's be honest, this country was built on blood and suffering, right? And
Without a doubt.
capitalism,
I'm a Native
right?
American, so
you know, it's so that's the truth that many people actually probably know and understand to a certain level, right? However, they
they
live
like to
their
deny it
lives.
though. They want to think that we're beyond that now.
No, I mean, regardless of their political position, a good amount of them know, right? Whether it's recent events or past events. But here's the interesting thing: they don't really care, right? And that's the thing. Like,
Yeah,
they'll get a piece of
without a doubt.
truth and they won't really care. They'll just move on back to, their lives.
They'll care
And,
more about the Kardashians for sure.
whatever entertains them,
Yeah,
right?
the Bachelor, or for me it's Survivor. I love Survivor.
Yeah, and it's funny because, one of the harsh truths, for example, that I've learned is that, there's a possibility where my existence could literally just be in the form of just strictly matter. And so whenever I'm no longer around, right, literally there's no longer going to be a me. Not that I hold that position, but it was this as Richard asked me earlier, am I moving forward? That's me moving forward, me looking at other ideas, right? And asking questions and seeing how things are, right? And you know, here's one of the most uncomfortable truths that I've learned in pondering that: there is no justice, and if there is justice, the only justice that exists is in the form of death, and it's dependent on the person, because if someone lives a terrible life, making other people's lives miserable and taking other lives and stuff like that, but they are perfectly fine with no longer existing, them dying is not justice.
I agree.
Powder the
Right.
entire universe and sieve it through the finest sieve. Find me one grain. All right. That's the end of the show. Hey, thanks a lot for coming, guys. I really appreciate you in the side chat as well. Thanks for stopping by.
Great conversation, man. I loved it, Richard. This was fun.
It was, and thank you for your participation in that and making it more fun than it would have been without you. To both of you, truly, and other people who dropped in, Ronan and Space Cadet, appreciate you. Space Cadet never could get a good connection, unfortunately. Till next time, everyone. And we're just going to do these spur of the moment sometimes. It's not going to be a scheduled thing. But thanks a lot, guys. And that's the end. Peace and respect to you all.
Have a good night.
Good night.
Right on.